thank you everybody for who's joining me online, or if you're watching this after. Really appreciate it. Also, thanks to Sophie Sparks at the Information Lab. So one of my colleagues who's done a brilliant job setting up a great series of webinars and getting the team really active over this kind of funky downtime for us all. So whether you're brand new to data prep, whether you are new to the Information Lab and our webinars, there's a whole load available on the Let's Talk Data group that is part of the meetup kind of website. So we publicize a lot of our content through there, and we try and make as much of it free as possible to let people dive into that. Today we're going to go and kind of start looking at the first of 4 sessions that I'm doing at the same time throughout this week, a shortened week in the UK due to the Easter holidays, but a short kind of overview of how to think like a data prepper. I use that term jokingly, but also truly as well. But it's something that you don't find that much terminology about, because data preparation still seems to be largely in the domain of other people. But actually what we're going to go through today is why is there a need to start using self-service data preparation and start working with tools like Prep and others as well. So what we're going to go through is diving into the different options that we have. It ultimately does focus on Tableau Prep, but lots of these lessons can go and be picked up and used in other tools. I'm currently in the process of writing a book for Riley, so that's Tableau Prep up and running. This is a sample cover. I do have a really fun animal lined up for the front of it. If I can keep convincing O'Reilly to let me do it, that will be a secret, unless I don't get my way. And I'll share that more. But really, the whole idea of this series of webinars is the first 4 chapters of this book, actually. And you'll find a little bit more of the write-up details on our prepping data site. So this is a separate initiative that myself and 3 of my other colleagues at the Information Lab have pulled together on basically the cradle to grave almost of data prep. So all the way from this first session, how to think about self-service data prep, getting into more of the fundamentals, connecting to data, going and dealing with those different data types that we have to continually, cleaning data, shaping data, etc. We'll be going over some of that main content as we go through these kind of 4 webinars this week. But if you want more detail, it's absolutely out here. So on the Prep and Data website, you will find a little tab across the top, which is the How to Prep Index, and you can absolutely go away, start digging into that. Again, all of it's free, all of it's widely available, just tidying up a lot more to make it into the book. So let's focus on what we've got going on this morning. So how to think like a data prepper. First of all, let's dig into the why. Why do we need to think about this kind of idea of data preparation, and why do I talk about self-service data preparation more than anything else?
This is okay.
Oh, I'm just going to go and slip somebody onto mute because a few people are talking in the background, so let me just do that quickly and then I will kick on. Perfect. All right, so what we've got within the kind of prep world is kind of a series of ideas, and I kind of wanted just to give a basis of how do we get really people started. So let's think about the why, but also how do we then go about planning your preparation? How do we go and shape your data, which is probably one of the earlier, harder tasks that you'll actually come across. And then also, when do you not need to use prep? Because that way, if you've kind of got that as an overall frame, we'll know when we need to dive in, when we don't need to dive in. Actually, am I even trying to use the right tool for the right job? I've always found when starting kind of using new tools, I kind of often like quiz myself of, well, am I even trying to do the right thing? And that's why we'll spend the Thursday session looking at whether we even need this stuff at all. So let's kick this on. Like I say, Prep and Data is a great home for this, not just with the how-to post, the last bullet point on there, but the fact that we've got actually lots of challenges on there now. So we release a challenge every week. That's posted Wednesdays, and then the following Tuesday we post a solution to that. You can take part in these challenges whenever you want. There's no time limit on there, so there's a lovely archive of about 60 challenges that are out there. Different ranges of complexity, but certainly just by kind of reading through the requirements as we give them, we try and frame them in a more of a business context. Because I was really, really conscious when I started really seeing Tableau Prep come to fruition that it was opening up a door for a lot of people. It's just whether they could see that and what opportunities they had to actually go and practice. And in the real world, I've been there many times, it's actually difficult to go and get those practice opportunities. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. But why am I talking about this? Well, my name's Allchin. I'm the other head coach at the data school in London. So I work alongside Andy Kriebel, Hall of Fame Zen Master, so he knows a heck of a lot. And what my side of the job often does is, yes, I teach Tableau Desktop as well, but lots more around the data preparation side. It's one thing that I've always battled with throughout my career, previously in financial services. But now I kind of really enjoy that challenge of using both Alteryx as well as Tableau Prep to really crack on. And there's a special thing about Tableau Prep for me that kind of creates a fun opportunity. So through Prep and Data and the how-to posts and lots of other work beside, I was made a Tableau Zen Master as well this year, which was a huge honor and also massively unexpected, I have to say. So that was quite cool, to say the least, but it's kind of given me the opportunity to go and introduce data preparation to a whole load more people. Within that, we will be talking about Tableau Prep today. So I'm not sure how many of you have actually come across Tableau Prep. Very quickly after Tableau Prep was initially launched, two different tools came out of the concept. So Tableau Prep, the original tool where we're going to go and do lots of the preparation as we go through this series of talks, is what's now called Tableau Prep Builder. So you'll hear that term and see that term written more about than you'll see just Tableau Prep. But if somebody's talking about Tableau Prep, they're often meaning this builder tool. Think of it like Tableau Desktop or Alteryx Designer. It's the thing that sits on your desktop where you're going to go and do that work and build that out. Also notice I've got a spelling mistake in here. With Tableau Prep Conductor, not pre-Conductor, as the slide says. Tableau Prep Conductor is where we go and automate lots of this work, where we go and share it with others and allow others to use the flows and the logic we build. I'll come back to that concept a little bit later. The tool was only launched in April 2018, and something that's been very different from Tableau Prep, if you're an existing Tableau Desktop user, is Prep has a release cycle that's every month versus Tableau Desktop now, which is every quarter. And that's really because the team, led by some really, really clever people and they've built some amazing software, was building in quite a lot of new content every single month. So they started to release on a monthly release cadence instead of this kind of quarterly release cadence that we wanted. So quite a few people come to Prep and Data and kind of try to keep up with the challenges to see those new features that are released. And there's so many of those. Recently, ranking and level of detail calculations have been built into the tool, and the speed of innovation is crazily quick, but is still largely aimed at somebody who is brand new to preparing their own data for themselves. And it really is that kind of idea of keeping things simple, but also making stuff that's repeatable to get rid of what I've called before in my career as this kind of handle turning, that job where you go and sit down maybe every Monday morning or Tuesday morning, and you're just doing this simple, repeatable task that's very tedious, monotonous, something that, as I used to run quite a large business intelligence team, the team used to make mistakes over because it's almost like you just find a flow within it. You're building something out, but it's easy to make mistakes because you're not having to think that hard about what you're actually having to do. And when you have to do this repeatable task time and time again, it doesn't play well for most humans. We don't really like that. It's easy. We don't overly think about it. It just becomes something that we almost just kind of let go a little bit of how much we'd normally think about it. So actually, where we have the opportunity to go and change that is with data preparation. And again, I'll come back to the self-service part of that in a bit. Because Tableau has always been focused on empowering the user. We've seen that through this drag and drop interface, where previously a lot of work had to be pushed to IT teams to go and build those reports for us. Coming from a large bank and insurer, some of the setup costs and time around that was super expensive. So what we often found was people just wouldn't have their questions answered. Where if I'm working my way through something and I've got questions, I should be able to answer that from the data I have access to. But if I don't have the ability to do that, that becomes super frustrating. Now, for lots of you who have started your career more recently than what I did, or just people who are still kind of stuck in that environment, that kind of seems a weird situation that existed, and really people and organizations are cracking through that beautifully due to thanks to tools like Tableau and a few others are out there that are really empowering that end user beautifully. But also what we've found is that creates its own challenge in its own way, that very quickly we get back to the point of having to do that more ourselves. Again, I'll come back to that in a bit. But what happens, and why I think the opportunity exists within Tableau Prep quite a lot, is that lots of the visual elements that we have from Tableau, their knowledge around data visualization, they've applied that to what we're seeing within Tableau Prep. And that's, I'll show Tableau Prep later within this talk this morning. We'll go through an example. We'll start to see that play out and how that's actually really key within the process. In data preparation previously, I was sat in front of the SQL interface, writing code for days, scratching my head over a comma that I just put in the wrong place, or why a certain join condition wouldn't work, or what the output would be. I'd only ever see that when it ran. Now with different and better tools, we're seeing that a lot more easily, and kind of it's easier to spot those outliers within your data set than ever before. And that really does open up the game to a lot more people rather than having to wait for others. So let's just kind of take this history lesson back and talk about self-service visual analytics. There's been a couple of sides to this. Firstly, the visual analytics part. For years, and especially coming from a financial services background, I've seen this just as much as many other people. Data was just tables. It was just rows and columns of data that were kind of spat out that you're expected to be able to understand and interpret. Like lots of the talk of big data, that kind of marketing branded curiosity of kind of what feels like 5 or 10 years ago now, actually stemmed from, there's a lot of data out there. How do I analyze it? How do I make anything meaningful from it? And it was actually the application of visualization that really made a difference to a lot of people. You know, if you're having to crunch data, it's actually difficult to wrap your head around that. Where if you start to have those data points shown to you in a visual way, our human brain and eyes are brilliant at spotting trends and patterns within that. We don't have to have a deep understanding of analytics and statistics to go and pick apart a chart. You're seeing that with lots of what's going on at the moment in the world, where charts and graphs are telling us a lot about a very difficult, complex subject that is epidemics and pandemics that are happening around us. So actually having the ability to see data visually made a massive difference. That, like I said, that wasn't always the case, and that wasn't always what people saw. But it's the self-service part of this that completely changed everything in my eyes. As that manager of the business intelligence team, I often felt that we were slowing down and almost handicapping the business slightly by forcing them to go slower and not always get the answer to the questions of what they needed to get when they needed to get it. And that's just, the business had way too many questions to go and always ask a specialist, communicate it in a certain way, in a very set way, handing over requirement documents to really go and bubble that reporting, that insight out of what we're looking for. And it was that ability for even somebody to go and explore their own data that started to really open the door to lots better questions, lots better understanding within the work that we were doing, that kind of stimulated lots of different analysis from what we've seen before. And that's really where kind of the visual analytics piece proliferated a lot more than what we'd seen. You know, humans are intelligent, they're asking lots of questions, but actually it's that ability to then go and share what they've found is really key. Now, if you found something within a large table, as lots of my analysts were doing within that team, or if you got your hands on a data set within the business and you kind of found something, you were sharing that in table format, it becomes very difficult to articulate what you found. So if you're able to go and build your own visualizations around this and start sharing that insight that you're finding, very quickly, yeah, that proliferation happens a lot faster. And that's really what we're starting to see with data preparation as well. Because not only are more people wanting to actually visually analyze their data, but they're wanting to do it themselves. They're wanting to go and then grab more data sets that they have around them. So here I've got a small snapshot from just a very typical Excel document where I've just got a column per month. It's not really set up for self-service visualization as we'd want to, certainly within Tableau. We'd want to pivot those months into a single column and have the relevant value alongside. Maybe we even want to go and group certain stores together to actually just form one Lewisham store rather than that data being broken out. So this is where we're using Tableau Prep to go and start taking that task that maybe this data gets updated every month to go and do that manipulation that we want, to go and turn it into the analysis that we want to see. Because let's face it, data is everywhere. We're swimming in it without doubt. But sadly, that data is not always ready to go. If it was, that'd be fantastic. I'm sure you're working in organizations and with data sets where they are beautifully constructed, they're ready for analysis, that work's gone into it, that investment in time and energy has happened, so that data's clear and ready to be used. But the fact that, I'll go back to the point that humans are curious. If I go and ever present a report to somebody, it's very rare that they then don't have another question, either that I've not thought about, or they've just applied their knowledge. They're the experts in the organization on their particular aspect. They're going to be able to ask questions that just quite frankly, I can't. So if we go and let people go and start adding additional elements to data sets themselves, they're going to be able to go and find elements, solve questions, ask questions that they hadn't been able to previously. And we're going to be able to go and move on because of that. That's why data preparation is important and having those skills, but previously that was hidden behind lots of technical layers. So a tool that opens up that self-service side has become super important. And for me, that's where Tableau Prep went somewhere where tools really hadn't done before. Alteryx made a massive stride towards this, do not get me wrong. Having a drag and drop interface has really helped. But Tableau Prep's lowered that barrier to entry even further just by how simple and how visual it's made the process. It's that user focus, it's that using pre-visualization challenges and understanding what those common challenges are and building the tool around those has really helped me go and work from input of my data set and thinking about using a data set to actually be producing the analytical answers for somebody so much faster. Or more importantly, as a full-time trainer, handing that task over to somebody and empowering them to do that instead. The familiarity of Tableau helps massively. I was very early on a user of Tableau Desktop, so way back in version 5.2, although I stepped up my usage a lot more with version 7. But I was very commonly used to somebody not having access or seen Tableau Desktop before and having to get them through those first stages. There are hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing, if not millions of users of Tableau Desktop now who are familiar with that interface. But actually, by lifting and dropping that desktop interface into Tableau Prep to a large extent, really helps let people get access to those data preparation skills that they're really getting into very early on. And the ability to go and feed into Tableau Desktop or Tableau Server whenever you need to. It's another element of Tableau Prep that I really appreciate, is the ability to go and create extracts and go and start visually working with my data a lot more whenever I want to. Not as a finished object, but just knowing, just going and seeing what those next challenges might be if you haven't got that experience. Because really, how do we get going with self-service data prep? Well, my absolute belief is we've just got to open the doors and let people start working with data. Yes, in a safe and secure way. We're obviously not handling around very detailed customer data sets for them to go and proliferate and potentially explore. But there are lots of data sets within every organization where people can start working with those, learning the skills and the questions to ask to help make life a lot easier in this sense. And we'll start diving into that now. Let's dive in and let's start having a look at where Tableau Prep opens the door to us with this. So I'm really using this talk to tee up the rest of the week. So this will be a lot of familiarization, hopefully. I'll throw some tips and tricks in as we go through this with Tableau Prep. But this will be kind of the initial familiarization for mostly people who haven't seen Prep so far. So if you're a Tableau user, this is the Tableau Prep screen. As soon as we load Tableau Prep, just in the same way that we did with Tableau Desktop, you will get a very familiar look and feel, especially when you just click this arrow up in the top left-hand corner to open up our connections pane. The connection pane looks and feels a little bit differently to what it does within Tableau Desktop, but I'll go into those details a little bit more. Let's first of all show you around the rest of the screen. While we have our recent flows, similar to desktop, where we've got the visualizations, the dashboards, worksheets that we've been working on previously, there, whenever you go and save those, they'll start to be added into this mix. So it's a list of my recent flows, some of the things that I've built into blog posts. We've also got this ability to go and see some useful resources. So whether that's having a look around the Tableau Prep Builder interface, going into the Tableau videos. So in the same way that the Tableau videos have always been available on tableau.com/learn for Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server, there's a series of about 15, 17 videos now on Tableau Prep that allow you to really dig into the tool and start to go and look at specific use cases and specific functions that you might want to explore within that. So good reminder to go and have a look at those videos as you're getting started with the tool. Or if you want a little recap, a visual recap on how that works, it's a great place to go. If you want a bit more detail than that, that's why I've teased up the how-to posts, or why I'm pushing the book of Tableau Prep up and running over the near future to go and be that resource for people to turn to however they want to learn. There are a series of blog posts, and those blog posts kind of change over time just to allow people to kind of dig in just to some deeper tools and functionality. And as the new features start coming out within Prep, which like I say is on a monthly basis, that's where you can go and find those. There are some sample flows down at the bottom. There's quite a lot going on within them. So maybe you'll find the solutions posts in the challenge index on the Prep and Data site a little bit easier to use than what some of those sample flows are, because you'll have a little bit more understanding from the challenge posts as to why we're trying to do certain things that we are. But let's go back to the key place within Tableau Desktop and Tableau Prep, which is actually connecting first of all to data. So just in the same way with Desktop as with Prep, we have a list of file-based connections. So this is the content that's probably likely to live on your machine, whether that's Excel, where probably lots of your data lies, CSV or text files under the text file header, different Tableau extracts, so whether that's our TDE files, our Tableau data extract, or the newer version of those, the hyper files. Or we can go and start reading data from PDFs, depending on how they're formatted, or statistical files if you are using R or SPSS or something like that. But this is the interesting piece for Tableau Prep, that we do have the ability to go and connect to the server. This is input from data sources, so actually using databases. And as I said earlier on, one of the things that I find lots of people who have started to use self-service visual analytics is that they don't necessarily always have that access back into a database, or if they do, the data is constructed in a way that we'd actually need to go and do joins or unions to pull different data sets together, different data tables that exist within that database. Well, actually, Prep makes it super simple to go and connect to those servers. If I go and look, for example, Teradata, where I spent lots of my life within the bank, all I need to have is that server address and then my username and password to actually go and access that. Now, that username and password would be the same as what I'd have if I was connecting directly to that database using the SQL interface. And that means that we don't have to set up anything special for Prep. If you have access to tables already, you still have those access. You don't need to do anything differently from what you've done before. So connecting into our server sources, but then making them a lot easier to go and see as we query and work with that data, that becomes so much easier to actually do within that overall way of working. Today, the example I'm going to walk through is from week 2 of 2019 from Prepping Data. And that's a challenge that I have kind of shown on a few different webinars, but it's a very simple Excel. But I'm intentionally not looking at the Excel right here, right now, because if you're using files, it's very common just to be able to go and open up that file, have a look through, familiarize yourself with that. That's not always possible when working with databases. So I want to show that however you connect to a data set, you can go and start to explore that data set, understand what challenges and changes you might want to make before we kick on. Now, tomorrow's session is going to go into this process a lot deeper. How do you actually go about working out what changes and what pieces of work you might need to do within your prep flow? So it's a session I call How to Plan Your Prep. And it kind of goes back to the idea that we've had within Tableau Desktop for years of we draw out what we might want to achieve. It's not going to be the perfect chart. We're clearly not going to go and draw all those data points, but we're going to go and understand the structure of what we're going to do and how does that actually help us visualize the data we want. Well, we would do the same within prep. Here, I'm going to kind of take just a couple of steps back from that process, just explore the data set a little bit more generically, and just kind of use some of my, what I'd say is probably an intermediate or advanced user of data prep would be able to look at a data set and understand what's going on. If you are brand new to this world, don't think that you just need to know this stuff off by heart. We'll dig into that a little bit more tomorrow. So with the input, you'll see that the screen has changed quite a lot. This weird little icon has come up. It looks like a table of data. This is what we class as our input step. You can see that we kind of get this kind of gray area underneath the screen. That's what I often refer to as the configuration pane of the various steps that we're going to go through. And you'll have some different options as we go through there. There's also something called the changes log, or I think of it almost as an audit log of the changes you've made within each of the steps that we're going to go through as we take our data set from however we're inputting it through a series of logical steps to prepare the data in the way that we want to, all the way through to where we go and output it. With the input step and lots of other steps, you'll see this kind of bottom right-hand side of the screen actually changed quite a lot. Depending on the type of step that you're doing, the actual output and the view of what's happening within that step changes quite a lot. Now, in this case, what we're seeing is we can see that we've got all of the data loaded in as string fields, even though we kind of have some numeric values. This data set, although it did come from Excel, might have originally started as a CSV. This is kind of classic behavior that we see as a comma separated variable file or text file, is where everything comes in as a string data source. So I can see that I've got some values, I've got some dates, I've got some different measures, Celsius and millimeters. I've got the name of the metrics that maybe relate to those measures. And I've also got some potential different spellings of some city names. So straight away, perhaps just trying to show you roughly what you're getting. If you're familiar with the data source, maybe you know what you should expect to get in this data. If not, this is kind of a great first indicator of it's giving us a few clues, but it's no different from kind of just doing a previous, what I do within SQL, just take a kind of top 100 rows of the data set and actually see what we've actually got kicking around in that data set to understand what's going on there. So let me show you where prep starts to get great. And that's by taking one of the 7 main steps that we have the choices of. So let me just walk you through these just really quickly. Prep's boiled down the data preparation process into kind of 7 main steps. So we can do a cleaning step. So this is where we're looking to actively clean up our rows of data, make it a lot cleaner and easier to use, either removing punctuation if it's not needed, or splitting values apart per se. We can aggregate data. This is a slightly harder one to wrap your head around if you haven't done this kind of work before. But when we're talking about aggregation of data, what we actually mean by that is we're going to go and take multiple rows and group those down together into less rows. So maybe it's summing up all of our different daily sales by store. Well, if we do it by store, then we're going to only end up with 1 row per store. So when we talk about aggregation of data, we're going to go and change the granularity of that data. Pivot, and for me, I'm of that age where I can't say the word pivot without thinking about Ross from Friends trying to get the sofa up the stairs. But this is where we're pivoting either a set of columns into individual rows, or taking those rows and creating new columns within our data set. We'll dive into pivot and spend a lot more time when we talk about shaping our data further. We have join, and what the join step is doing is where we have multiple data tables and actually putting them together into one table. And this is where we'd be adding additional columns from one data table onto another. So think of a join as almost 2 lift doors closing. They're closing from side to side, they're going horizontally, We're just adding one onto the other. And to do that, we need to go and set up a whole load of conditions potentially to say, how do we want the two data tables to be joined together, have those columns added together at the right level of granularity and aggregation, etc., to make sure one row of data is still about that instance, that record that we're trying to show. Now, union is a very similar idea. Apart from, instead of those columns being added horizontally, we're actually just going and stacking data sets on top of each other. I love the little union icon here. It always makes me think of Jenga. It's where we're going to go and take those individual rows of data and go and stack them on top of each other. I often come across unions needed to happen where you're maybe getting that weekly or monthly feed in, maybe from a third party or from another team within your organization. And you're just going to go and slowly kind of stack up those data sets as you go through and build one longer data set. Often the data structure needs to stay pretty similar, or it's difficult to do that union step. But actually having those steps in place and that union step, pulling everything together can be super useful. Unions don't just happen within the union step though. You'll notice behind my drop-down menu at the moment, we've got that wildcard union. Unions are available elsewhere within the tool because there's quite a few times where you actually just want to go and pull together very similar data files and you want to enable that. We'll look at that another day, but wildcard union can save quite a lot of rework. Now, everything I've said so far is about how prep makes life super simple and makes life a lot easier. That's not always true when we start looking at the script. And the scripting step is one that is probably beyond quite a few people who are starting data preparation for the first time. However, what the script step does is uses R, the programming language, or Python. And it's playing on the fact that more and more people are being trained, especially within universities, to use scripting or programming to be able to work with data. So R and Python are two of the major programming languages where we see that. So the Tableau Prep team are conscious the tool's not fully baked yet. Doesn't have every feature under the sun that you would want it to. So the scripting steps kind of almost a get out of jail free card or a catch-all step, catch-all bucket, sorry, where you're actually having the ability to go and code some different functionality than what you might have otherwise. We won't get into that within this webinar series, but I wrote a recent how-to post if you want to go and explore that a little bit further. And let's face it, we're not doing the data preparation work for the fun of it, unless you're doing prepping data, then that probably is for the fun of it, unless it's just the learning. But we want to go and output that data. We want to go and share it and send it somewhere. So you can absolutely do that with the output step. Currently, that is to hyper files and TDEs, that's Tableau Data Extracts, and also a CSV file. What was announced at the conference last year is the ability to write to a database. Again, depending on the permissions you have within your database and what's being allocated to that user of the database that I showed earlier. If you're using your username to sign into that database, then that will control and give the right permissions. So we want to be careful with that, but also we're only going to give those permissions to the right people at the right time. There's one final piece, which is insert flow. This is the ability to go and save multiple steps. So if you have a common task that you're using across different workbooks within Tableau Prep, different flow files, as we like to call them, then that's where we can go and save our flows, save those common steps, and go and drop them into different places at different times, different workbooks, to go and structure that work out how we want to. So rather than having lots and lots of tools, lots and lots of options, Tableau Prep really has this boiled down to these simple steps. So let's go and have a walk through where we're going to go and have a look at a few of these and how we might use those, and also iterate on those, because that's one important thing with Prep. Just like Tableau Desktop, you only really learn, you only really find out by iterating and working with your data as to what you actually want. So let's dive in and have a look at that. So my first step, which I normally take every single time I work with data and work in Tableau Prep, is I use a clean step. And what this clean step does is it's almost like a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. It lets us do a lot of different things. Just like the Tableau right-click menu, quite a lot of that's hidden away. So only certain things are being bubbled up to us kind of in our screen real estate that we have at certain points, so it doesn't become too difficult and too overloaded as we work our way through that. What we actually see off the back of this is the ability to just to kind of find the options that we probably want when we want them. So let me just take you through the screen because you're going to spend quite a bit of time here. Our top menu, you'll see these options change over time. These will be the common tasks that Tableau Prep's thinking that you're likely to do. I'll show you a little bit later on, but you'll also see a light bulb pop up down, just kind of where my mouse is at the moment on the screen. And that's where Tableau Prep's going to use its kind of internal logic to go and make recommendations as to what you might want to do to your data set to improve your data set further. In the middle, we see what we class as the profile pane. And that profile pane is named in such a way because of these kind of gray bars that you can see in the background. You'll notice in metric, I've got four different metrics that all of the same length and one metric that's smaller. And what Tableau Prep's actually doing here is building a histogram. Those gray bars are forming a histogram in the background, so showing the distribution of the number of rows in our data set that have that value. So if we look at our data set metric, we can see each time max, min, precipitation of wind speeds forming, or where we have metric as well. Now, normally with the headers, they get taken out of our data set, but I can see the word metric is here, which is also the same as the header. So that starts to kind of tip me off as to something that might be going on within my data set. I'll come back to that, but this is where the profile pane can be super useful. Tableau Prep actually works on the basis of using a sample as you go and build your flow, and only calls upon the full data set when you actually run that flow. So if you had a massive data set, let's say it's a few billion rows of data, you don't want Prep have to be chunking through that every single time. So Prep will use a clever algorithm to form an overview, a profile of your data that's actually ultimately using a representative sample of the data set. Now, all of those different options that you'll find within that kind of sample are listed out within your profile. So in this case, in our city field, we have loads of different values for our cities. And we can kind of see that the spelling is a little bit off in some cases. Almost here, we're seeing somebody try to use their password maybe, as where they're looking at actually getting their Edinburgh, or how they've entered their Edinburgh actual data point. Well, we can certainly assume it's Edinburgh because its data set's only about London and Edinburgh. When you have too many different options and values to actually fit on the screen, Tableau Prep provides this little histogram to the side, which we can actually use to scroll up and scroll down through our values to see what's going on within there. We can see that across all of the different values and data fields within our data set. But also what we can do is go and look at where we see those values. So if I want to look at all of my rows that contain the term London, not only does the option down at the bottom, my data pane, update to just be about those rows, but also I see highlighted in blue all of the different values that actually are associated or found in those rows that contain London. So I can see the distribution of my values, the dates that those values are actually in this London option within my data. So that starts to allow us to go and explore the data set a lot further. Now, nulls will appear at the top of that list. So null is where we have an absence of data. So there's just basically no record. Maybe this cell would be empty in our table. So we would get a null that pops to the top because often we want to treat nulls very differently. Again, we'll come back and talk about that at another point. But first and foremost, I just want to kind of tidy up this data a little bit because it's clearly, I'm weirded out by the fact I've got each of my names and my columns are also within my data set too. And that's normally a sign that as we scroll through our data set, that we'll actually find, yep, we've kind of got two tables within our data. So this is probably a formatted table, formatted sheet within Excel, where somebody's broken up that worksheet into a couple of different tables for us. So we've got a few options of how to get rid of those. I could just right click and exclude that, but actually I'm going to use the power of Tableau and what we have elsewhere to do something a little bit different. And that's with our Excel sheet, we still have the option to use our data interpreter. And if no one's ever used this within Desktop before, what happens is Tableau goes through and searches through the Excel sheets that we've got or the workbook that we're connected to and finds within our sheet, I only have one sheet here, sheet 1, beautifully named, I know. It goes and finds the range of where a data table actually exists. So here I've got one table and I've got a second table of data. They're a couple of rows apart, but kind of in the same columns. So to me, that says that if they're kind of going across the same columns and they had the same names within those field headers or what should be field headers, then I probably want to go and union those together. So let's go and have a look at how we do that. Well, first of all, I can drag out my first table that Tableau's found. Remember, don't drag out my sheet or we're going to duplicate that data, and go and drag out that second table. And I can start to see that here I've got data about Edinburgh, where in that first one I've got data about London. Now to go and pull these together, you can either go and click on the actual data sheet icon, so that input step, and drag one towards the other. And when you do, you get a couple of options come up. So hopefully you can see just behind my transparent step, input step, you can see that I've got union or joins. Well, here I'm assuming the field names, as they're the same, they are the same fields. So I can go and actually stack those one on top of each other. That's where we're going to go and use a union. So let me go and drop that in. And what Tableau shows is that both of those data sources are being fed into this one union step. Now, what's quite fun with Prep is you can change these step colors. And the reason why I do this is ultimately it helps me remember if I come back to this flow at another time, how and why certain things are flowing together. So my logical coding is whenever I have a union, I'll pick a single color and actually just go and kind of blur those colors together. That's what's making my union. But if I'm going to do a join, then I'll do it as a mix of my colors. So I've gone back to my primary and secondary and tertiary color palettes from primary school. And I use that logic and that helps people read those. If you want to take your documentation further, you can rename those steps. So here I could just class this one as London and this one as Edinburgh. I've now got a brain block about how to spell Edinburgh correctly after messing up my data earlier. And with those steps, you can also add descriptions. And this is where you can actually just write a lot more details. You've got 200 characters just to go and start to put those together and then show or hide those. Now, documenting data sources like this is super useful because if you're, maybe even if you're not allowed to write the official data sources back to your database, what you can do is you can start to map out your logic and let the people who are going to go and pick up those data sources and build them into more of a productionized environment. So something where it just kind of will get refreshed and repeated continually, then that's what we're going to see a lot more. Here, my union step has pulled together those two sources. So let's go and work out my logic that either I might want to pass across, or if it's all built correctly, I might have the permissions to go and push that myself. Now with the union step, we actually go and get an additional column in our data. So you now see that table names has popped up. That's our just trying to map which data items have come from which table. So we can see in each, we've got the same number of our metrics. It's just whether that data is coming in about Edinburgh or London. That's the only change that we're seeing within here. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Now the equivalent of right click within Tableau Prep is this little 3 dots, our more options menu, or what I call the profile pane menu. If I click on that, that's going to go and give me a whole load of choices around filtering, grouping, cleaning, and splitting data, as well as creating calculated fields, etc. In this case, I'm just going to get rid of that. I don't need that table name from anything. Sometimes they can be super useful that those table names will contain dates, and you might need to use that date and add that into your data set to see what rows are coming into your data set when. Well, I've got my data together. Now I need to start clearing it up. And I'm first of all going to go and start with this city field. Now, one of my favorite things within Prep is how it's dealing with string characters. So where we have characters that aren't necessarily numeric, so letters, or in this case, punctuation as well. So it's where what's normally signaled by this ABC icon, the fact it's a string. And what I want to do is I want to go and clean this data up to go and be representative of Edinburgh spelled correctly and also London spelled correctly too. So let's go and look at how we would do that within Prep. So if I click on my menu, go down to group and replace, I could go and just manually go and pull these together. But actually, if I updated this data set, I don't know whether somebody else is going to have a different spelling to what I've captured before. So I want Tableau Prep to do this work for me. And this is where we've got 3 different options within our data set or within the tool to go and to see if we can pull these values together in some way. How the word's pronounced within English. Does that value that we're looking at have characters that relate to each other? So are they similar, common characters? Or actually is the spelling similar, but then we've got different characters within the values, but they're in a similar order for where those characters are similar, that we can assume just somebody's made a spelling mistake. So let's look at how effective they are. I'll start with pronunciation. So by selecting that, Tableau Prep just goes and starts grouping a lot of the values together. You'll see that our Edinburgh-based passwords and London spelled as O'Donnell hasn't worked. We'll come back to those in a sec. With Edinburgh, if you go and click on the value that has the paperclip by it, remember that's Tableau Desktop's way of saying that we've got a group, we'll see that those values have actually been grouped together. London, we picked up all of these different ways that you would pronounce London. It's close enough that Prep's assuming it's the same. Now you can actually go and change the level of the algorithm. It doesn't actually really change much within this pronunciation as to whether you're being more or less precise with how you're having that algorithm applied. But in this case, we're kind of got a good way there. So I'll click done, I'll accept those changes. And like I say, the changes log is always there to kind of show you as you're working through your data prep, what you're doing and in which order as well. You can change those steps. I'll come back to that in a sec. Here, I'm just going to go into group and replace again, and this time I'm going to use common characters. Now, just because you've done a step once doesn't mean you can't do a similar thing again just to go and pick up more of the values. So in this way, common characters just picks up the different use of exactly the same characters we find in London, just in a different order. Probably not spelt the same, common characters, just in a very different order. So last but not least, let's just go and look at the spelling and see if we're close enough with the spelling to get our password. Yes, we are, into our Edinburgh piece. And you can now see that we've actually gone and captured those 3 group and replace steps or bits of logic within this one single overview clean step. The clean steps are very, for want of a better term, dull icon, and you'll see lots of the different pieces as the different stages and steps that we have appearing above there. So I'm just going to be conscious of time. We've got 10 minutes left. I want to leave about 5 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm just going to go and step through some of the other pieces that I would do within this. Now, let's go and think about Ross and Friends again, do a pivot step. And here I want to go and make each of my metrics, well, I kind of want each of those to be a separate column within my data. So in that case, I'm going to take my rows to columns. But this is where we can start thinking about Prep being iterative. Because if you didn't know how to use this, I can go and say, well, I want each of my measures and each of my metrics to be my columns. Well, I can't actually do that. I can't change that because I need to have a single field to be that thing that is going to be my new columns within my data set. So what I need to do instead is go and actually piece those together first. So I can go back to my clean step and I'm going to go and build a calculated field. So in this case, create calculated field custom. And because I selected it from metric, that's going to load in for me. And I'm going to go and drop into that my measure and pull it together with just a hyphen in between, just to go and show what I've got within there to pull that calculation together. Now, little prep tip, if you name it the same thing as what one of your columns is, that actually acts as an overwrite. So my metric now becomes this nicely pulled together field where previously it was 2 separate. That allows me just to go and remove my measure. And now with my rows to columns pivot, I can drag that metric field in and I'm creating these nice columns that won't update within my data set until I fully configure this. You'll notice Prep at the moment showing an error. It's because I haven't fully configured this step correctly as I need to. The way I can get there is by summing up my values. And that starts to show that I'm actually forming together a data set that's much more representative of actually where I want to go with this. With the rows to column step, city and date are left outside. We don't need to do anything with it. We're not creating new columns out of each of my cities or my dates. They're just staying as they are within the data set. And you can kind of see, you can kind of see that playing out within my data set at the bottom here. Now, I find that quite hard to use, and depending on your screen size, that can be quite small. So quite often I find that I'll add a clean step just to go and start structuring out my data to see what's happened. What you'll find is if Prep creates new columns or data fields or alters data fields through calculations, they get moved to the front of your data set. So they'll be over on the left-hand side of your data set. We don't need to worry about the order of our columns because quite often we're building data sets for Tableau. So Tableau is just going to absorb those in and break them up by dimensions and measures, or in the new data modeling capability that's coming in 2020.2, or maybe coming in 2020.2. Sorry, that's in beta at the moment. But what we're actually finding is that you don't need to worry about that order of the columns. If you do, you can absolutely pick those columns up and move those around, and that will change the order of those. In the same way with our order of our columns, we don't need to think about the order of values because Tableau is just going to go and absorb those in. Trying to work out those sorts, that's not as easy at the moment, but we'll show you rank in a future session to dive into that. And you can always sort by those to make it much easier to go and control that order of the table if that helps you analyze that data further. But here I can see I've got the same number of rows for Edinburgh and London, and they're nicely distributed across the dates. What we've got the difference is the difference in values as we go through. So our final step in this simple workflow will be setting up our output. And our output, we can either save to a file or we can actually go and publish it to Tableau server. So if we've got access to a Tableau server, we can go and start creating data sources for that server. In this case, I'm going to go and output this as a CSV file. And then I can go and browse and save this into my work. Just like Tableau Desktop, you get my prep repository rather than my Tableau repository. I think it's called my Tableau Prep repository, actually, to go and piece that together. I'm just going to call this version 2. Accept that. Now, by accepting that, I haven't actually run the flow. So the thing that you just want to be cognizant of is just actually clicking that run flow at the end for Tableau to actually go and run that flow for us. So that will have now created us a data set. But if you didn't know that you were necessarily ready to go and publish that data set, maybe you wanted to go and check what was going on, what you can do is right click and preview in Tableau Desktop. And that will actually create a temporary hyperfile that will have that sample data in, that will go and produce that view and see how the data is structured for whether you've got that data set up in the right way for you to start doing your analysis. But having the ability to do this means I haven't had to go back to somebody else. I haven't had to involve others within this process of understanding what's my data, what manipulations I want to make, and how I want to go about doing that. So now if I did want to go and have this productionized, I could go and hand over this flow. Now it's kind of a logical set of steps that I've gone through. Even the clean step where lots of things are going on, we've got the audit trail, that changes log of how to go about doing that. But also I've done that without really any coding apart from that calculation, which again, maybe lots of Tableau Desktop users are used to now. So really that's what we mean by self-service data preparation. It's somebody being able to do this for themselves. And like I say, in the sessions that we're going to dive into off the back of this, it's how do you go and plan how to deal with those more complicated tasks? And then on top of that, let's go and look at shaping data. What shape does that data need to be? That's quite a theoretical piece to wrap your head around. And then last but not least, we're going to go and dive into when would you not want to use Tableau Prep? Maybe when are you still going to go and do that task in Tableau Desktop? Or maybe we don't need to do data prep at all. So for today, I'm going to stop there and say, is there any questions? I put lots of you on mute, so feel free to take yourselves off mute and ask questions or drop them into the chat, either way, whatever works for you. Okay, so question from Yanis. When you publish to server, Do you only need to refresh at the server level or a prep first? That's a brilliant question, Yanis. One thing I'd say around that is that there's two different parts of Prep Conductor. There's Prep Conductor as the tool that sits on the server and works its way through and runs everything. The other part is just the piece that's holding those flows, holding those data sources. To get Prep Conductor, you actually need to add the data management add-on, which is a small additional amount that gets you Tableau catalog, as well as the full Prep Conductor tool that will actually go and schedule those flows. Now, if you've published a flow that has the ability for that server to go and connect to the input sources, and if those input sources are being updated, then if you set up a schedule on Prep Conductor, you don't need to touch it within Tableau Prep Builder anymore at all. That can all happen on the server level. You are good to go. If, however, you don't have the data management add-on, you would need to come back into Tableau Prep Builder to actually go and just click on that Run All button. So the Run All at the top has the ability for you to go and run multiple outputs at the same time within the screen, just in case you've got multiple output steps, or just go and if you've got a specific one, just go and click on the play button for the output. And that will go and pick up the latest data in that input and run that all the way through. Within the beta for 2020.2 at the moment, Tableau are looking at incremental and full refreshes and how giving the user more control around that. So there is more to come there. Cool, thanks, Yanis. Great question. Anything else from anyone else? Oh, great question from Michael. So if I've got a CSV or Excel that's got additional text above the rows or columns of actual data, how does the interpreter recognize these? It's Tableau, the data interpreter is pretty clever, and it's slowly being refined over the years, that it looks for a table structure. So if we think about additional text that might be at the top of an Excel file, so let's say there's a title, subtitle, and then maybe a description of what's in that file. Because that doesn't look and feel like a table, Tableau Desktop and Prep will ignore that. I have a sample file that I actually created to actually go and test this within Tableau called Nicely Formatted Spreadsheet. I've used it in a few training sessions. And it works really well as just being that test of what do you have in that situation. And that's really where Tableau is looking at it going, that's not a table of data, it just skips over it. So that's where you won't actually see it within this list on the left-hand side. So if you wanted to get something out of that additional text, you would kind of need to build it in a slightly different way, either by naming those sheets, or maybe it's named within the actual worksheet of the Excel workbook itself. Otherwise, you might need to build it in as a separate calculation to add that text or that project title back in. So that's where the data interpreter can help, or maybe actually hinders in that way. But what you'd also notice is, as I loaded just the sheet one by itself, that has all of the data values within inside there, not always held as a nice structure. So what you could have is within your input step, just load in the data piece at the top. And what you'd actually have, you could ignore the tables, you could use the data interpreter for that as a separate input, but you could load in that sheet one, strip out that text that has that useful piece of information in, process that by filtering it down, and then being able to move on from there. So another question is whether you can go and share the individual work so other members can amend. So that's where publishing to the server works really well. It will actually publish that flow up as Prep Conductor can publish the flow up, or publishing the data source. Or just like Tableau Desktop, if I just pop open this screen and hide my participants for a sec, then you've got two options of how to save. You can save the flow files, so that's where, just the same as a TWB file in Tableau, it's just the data about that flow, or you can save a packaged flow file, which actually has the data within it as well. So that's your two different options that you could then go and send those to each other if you don't have a Tableau server version kicking around. But yeah, two different options of how you can go and share that work, and then other people can amend those as they go through. Any further questions, or are we good to finish there? Where can you find the recordings of previous sessions? Well, this is my first session. So the rest of the sessions are going to come out over the next 3 days. So same time on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we'll dive into those other sessions. We'll make sure the Information Lab Twitter account and mine publishes those out, and we'll be saving those all to YouTube. The meetup sessions have got all of the links in there, and we can add those into the comments on the actual meetup sessions as well, so they're there. So thanks very much for everyone joining today. And I will hopefully speak to a few more of you again tomorrow when we dive into actually how do you go about planning your prep, even when some of those challenges can be quite funky and quite challenging. So hopefully that was useful. Feel free to contact me on Twitter or just drop questions into the meetup and we'll come back and answer those. So thanks everyone, and speak to you all again soon.